You okay there, bud?
You okay?
Yeah, I'm just feeling a bit conflicted. I'm not sure if I should review Doctor Sleep as a Stephen King fan or as a Stanley Kubrick fan, but I guess it is appropriate that I feel conflicted because this was a narratively confused movie that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a Faithful King adaptation or a Stanley Kubrick homage. And, I mean, come on. If I wanted to see Ewan McGregor embarrass himself, I would just watch Moulin Rouge again.
Oh, hell no. That's Obi-Wan, bitch! Hey, you deserved that.
Yep.
Ugh.
Good evening, boils and ghouls, and welcome to another episode of Around the Clock Frights. Tonight we are going to be reviewing the movie Star Wars Episode 2, The Revenge of Dr. Sleep.
Okay, there were so many things wrong with that statement that we're just gonna have to, okay, cut! So, I made Thor sign a contract saying that she can never do the opening statement ever again. But tonight, we are reviewing the long-awaited sequel to Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, The Shining, and Dr. Sleep, adapted from the book by Stephen King. This is a sequel 40 years in the making, starring none of the original cast, but maintaining much of its spirit. And I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of on the fence about Dr. Sleep because, for one, I was a little afraid that director Mike Flanagan might be making too much of an homage to Stanley Kubrick. You know, he wouldn't be able to find his own original voice. And honestly, after watching the movie, I just have to say that I just thought there were too many vegetables in the pot. I thought this movie struggled to be an adaptation of Dr. Sleep, and I thought it kind of struggled to be a sequel to The Shining, and often the two storylines would just collide, and it could often be a little messy, and whenever I tried to pay homage to The Shining, honestly, I thought it was just distracting, like they would try to replicate some of the shots from the original, and I couldn't focus on the Dr. Sleep story. In my mind, I was thinking too much of The Shining, but those are my initial thoughts. Thor, what are your thoughts on Doctor Strange, love?
I was really looking forward to Dr. Sleep 2. I wanted it to be a really good movie. I love Ewan McGregor as an actor. He's done so many different roles that are just iconic. I know we joked about Star Wars, but, you know, that's just the tip of the iceberg for him. And he's a really good actor. Mm-hmm. So I had faith that he could actually carry the movie as a grown Danny Torrance, but at the same time, there was a balance that had to be struck, and it was a very hard balance to achieve, if you could even achieve it at all.
Kim?
Honestly, like I was definitely one of the ones that was looking forward to this movie. I really love The Shining, so I thought, oh, a sequel to The Shining, this has got to be a good one.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, after watching it, I kind of agree with Josh on the aspect of it felt like it was just replicating The Shining way too much, and then trying to bring some of those scenes that we've already seen in The Shining into Dr. Sleep, and it was very distracting. Like, I'm sitting there wondering when's the next time we're going to have a scene that's, you know, going to be portrayed from the film.
You know what it reminded me of, in all honesty? Do you remember that sequence in Ready Player One where the characters inside the video game go to, you know, they go to The Shining.
The Shining.
Literally, they enter Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and you know, in that movie it was fine because
it was meant to be an homage.
Yeah, but in this movie, I mean, it just felt like, you know, whenever they were replicating The Shining, it just felt like we were being invaded by an entirely different movie, because when this movie follows the Dr. Sleep narrative, you know, as it is in the book, it can actually be really good. There were some really good things in this movie.
Like when it really went down to the Dr. Sleep part of it, I really actually enjoyed the storyline it came with it.
Oh yeah.
And if it would have just cut some of those scenes out, it
would have been fine.
It would have.
I do have to say that when it came to a lot of those Kubrickian shots, where you had, you know, the tininess and then the big wide and the going over everything. Part of the reason why those shots were so disturbing is because it gave that oppressive feeling of isolation in The Shining. They're in the middle of a town. You're not going to get the same oppressive feeling when you're surrounded by people. So it didn't communicate the same way.
You're magic. Like me.
I need you to listen to me. The world's a hungry place. A dark place.
Hi there.
Director Mike Flanagan is one of my favorite modern horror directors. He has emulated Kubrick's style before in the past, especially with his hit show, The Haunting of the Hill House. There's an episode that takes place almost entirely inside a funeral home, and there are just several long takes where we follow characters walking around, and feels very Kubrick. In this film, I just thought he was too much of a slave to Kubrick's vision. I didn't think he brought enough of his own material to the table, and that's just how I felt. But, sorry.
No, I was just going to agree with you. I think it was very confused. And when it was doing the Dr. Sleep stuff, it was great.
Mhm.
When it was doing the Shining stuff, you could tell that it was this beautiful homage.
Mhm.
Problem is that the way that the movie The Shining and the book The Shining spoke
Mhm.
and the way Dr. Sleep spoke was they couldn't communicate well together. This was about isolation. This was about finding connection.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And you can't merge those two.
No, you can't. But guys, we are going to get into the plot of this movie. We are going to be going into some spoilers because there are several things that we would like to discuss in depth. So, but yes, again, spoilers from here on out. But let's break down the plot. So right from the beginning, this movie has two opening sequences.
Mhm.
The first one, where the little girl encounters Rebecca Ferguson. Rebecca Ferguson is
Eats her.
creepy as hell.
Mhm.
We see the members of the True Knot for the first time. They all gang up on this little girl. Great,
No, yeah.
great. It was a very solid horror opening.
Oh, yeah.
No, I agree on that one, definitely.
It made you feel uneasy, but then it cuts to the opening credits where they recreate certain scenes from The Shining where little Danny Torrance is riding his tricycle down the hallway. And, it's just, every shot is exactly the same as it was in the original movie, which, these aren't the original actors, and I can definitely see what he was trying to do, but it just felt like a distraction. It felt like it could have been like one of those really cheesy commercials where, they're recreating sequences from The Shining, but it's actually a commercial for the newest iPhone.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah. I do give him credit, though. Some of the actors that portrayed, are supposed to be portraying the characters from The Shining looked almost the same, identical to...
They did have a lot of really good
And then
casting.
the way the actress who played Wendy Torrance, it was unbelievable.
The ears.
It almost felt like you were watching Shelley Duvall on screen. Like the way she was even like acting how she would have acted in The Shining. Like
It would have been terrible. I'm sorry.
There was a bit of character study there. Definitely he hired somebody that had the ears and the same kind of facial structure, but...
I recognize that actress. That was actually Alex Esso. She was in an incredibly effective indie horror film called Starry Eyes, where she plays this Los Angeles actress who is desperate to get her first really big acting gig, and she ends up doing some terrible things. But anyway, what would have been really horrifying is if they had actually brought back Shelley Duvall, but they had digitally de-aged her.
No, that would not have been good.
It would have been
That would have
terrible.
been terrible. No.
I read somewhere, though, that the actress who played Wendy in this was kind of close with Shelley Duvall.
Really?
I don't remember where I saw that, but somebody, I read
that's
somewhere
cool.
that they were close and stuff, like they were friends.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it would make sense, why she portrayed it so well. Maybe she connected with her on a level where they could discuss how that character, how she
It's always
did
a
that
good
character.
idea when you're going after an iconic character to at least touch base with the person that played him before,
Mm-hmm.
just to see what insight you can gain from them. You can still put your own spin on them, but, there's something about the way they portrayed it that made it iconic.
No, he didn't like it too much at first. And then he had an injury, so we kept him out for a while. And yeah, I guess that's about the time when I first noticed that he was talking to Tony.
So basically you have Danny, his mom and him moved away. He's obviously very traumatized. And the ghosts are coming after him. So you see the decaying woman from the bathtub in all of her splendor.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Danny's terrified. So the gentleman from The Shining, I forget his name.
And it's the same actor too.
No, it's
Yeah.
not.
Is it?
See,
No.
they looked so similar.
Scatman
Oh.
Crothers has unfortunately passed away, but the actor who replaced him did a damn good job.
He did
He-
such a
He
good
tricked
job.
me. I thought it was for a second.
Oh my gosh, he
Okay.
did such a good job. Anyway, so the guy who basically had tried to coach Danny through his first brush with being, you know, this incredibly powerful psychic, comes back to him kind of like, you know, Star Wars reference, kind of like the Obi-Wan and the Jedi coming back to guide Luke through his journey. And he teaches him how to trap the ghosts that come after him, or the things that come after him, in boxes. And so next night he sees the old lady in the bathtub, and instead of being scared and running away or anything else like that, he heads right into the bathtub, or the bathroom, shuts the door, and you hear the old lady screaming. And then you see this box shut.
Good concept.
There's a reason. That's an excellent concept.
It is.
When it picks
I'm
up,
seriously going to teach that to my kids for you know, if they get scared of something.
well, when it picks up from The Shining, you know, when we see those sequences with young Danny and his mother, you know, living, you know, they're living in a different
Florida.
They're living in a different state. You know, they're obviously traumatized by what happened. Those sequences are pretty effective.
Mhm.
But then we meet Danny Torrance as an adult, played by Ewan McGregor. He has hit a low point in his life, and you can tell
Oh my
he's hit a low point.
God.
You can tell that he's hit a low point because he has a fully grown beard.
Oh, dude.
But anyway, so yeah,
Mm.
we meet Danny, and here's a part of the story that felt kind of rushed because, you know, he's an alcoholic, he abuses drugs, he is basically a drifter, he goes from town to town. He finally settles down, and he settles down in this community when he meets this, you know, man who offers to set him up in this apartment. This very good-hearted man who ends up becoming his friend. He attends Alcoholics Anonymous meetings where, you know, he finally, you know, creates a better version of himself. And honestly, just the way they kind of rushed through these scenes of Danny becoming, you know, a better person, you know, recovering from his alcoholism, I thought they were a bit rushed. They were almost like footnotes from the novel. I thought they could have slowed down just a little bit.
Dude,
maybe-
the movie was already 2.5 hours long.
So you're saying maybe make it seem a little bit more of his
Yeah, his struggle.
struggles? Yeah.
hmm
And then,
Because,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, because, you know, we get a scene where, you know, he wakes up in bed with this girl. You know, he's
Oh,
obviously...
that was.
That was bad.
He's alone on the streets, and then bam, like 1 or 2 scenes later, he's suddenly a recovered alcoholic, and
No, there
he
was
is-
this huge thing that caused him to decide to change.
hold on.
There was this huge thing that made him push to change, and it terrified him from who he became. And the reason why is because he wakes up this one morning with a girl in his bed, and it's the girl he slept with earlier, and she's dead.
Mhm.
And she starts talking to him about, they haven't found us yet. They haven't found us yet. And he sees this baby that was at the house with this girl that he slept with, that he just kind of ran from and everything like that. And they're both dead. And she keeps telling him, they haven't found us yet. Realize he was at that apartment. She was probably dead when he left her.
Like she OD'd pretty much.
Like,
because
yeah.
you see vomit in the bed. So.
Yeah. So she probably OD'd when he left her, and he left the baby there, meaning that he was the reason why that baby died. He knew that, and he was like, I have got to change. And that's when he went to the dude and was like, I need help.
I only met 2 or 3 people like us. They died. When I was a kid, I bumped into these things. I don't know about magic. I was called it The Shining.
Where his character really started to shine for me was when he was working in the hospice, and, you know, he was comforting the elderly individuals who are on death's bed, and they call him, you know, Dr. Sleep because, you know, they thought that he was the doctor and he was there to, you know, comfort them.
Help them to sleep.
And then you have the cat who The little cat that would go in the rooms.
Azzy, the cat
Azzy.
who knew like when a person was about to die. So yeah, those scenes where we see Ewan McGregor, being very vulnerable and open, just comforting these people, as they're living out their final moments. Those scenes were very potent, and I could really connect with him. But then Thor, why don't you talk about the second main character in this movie?
I like her.
The little girl who won all of our hearts. This actress was fantastic.
Oh my God, she was amazing. So basically, you have this. While you're traveling with Danny, you get little bits of this young girl named Abra.
Mm-hmm.
And Abra, at first, when you meet her, is a little girl, maybe 5-6 years
5
old.
years old. It was her 5th birthday.
There we go. Thank you. It was her 5th birthday, and she is magic.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for instance, she tells her parents when a magician's showing her how to float a spoon or something, she's like, I can do that. And her parents are like, okay, yeah. And then they go into their kitchen and all the spoons are up on the ceiling, just kind of turning.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not stuck in there. They're just up, floating. And so that's Abra. Fast forward 13 years later, and Abra is actually a little bit more powerful, a little bit more of she's a lot more of a badass.
Mm-hmm.
And she ends up with connecting with Danny. Realize that Danny is, pretty, as much as he shut stuff off, Danny's pretty powerful. So he's someone that she can reach out to.
Then we are introduced to this group of cultists called the True Knots. Basically, these beings who have lived for many generations, and they feed off of psychic children. And this is where some unintentional comedy started to creep into the movie a little bit, because they would constantly talk about how steamy these kids were.
Oh God, that was so disturbing.
It was.
This child has so much steam. It kind of reminded me of that episode of South Park with the Harley Boys, where they would get like a raging clue, like I have such a raging, I have such a big clue. Like, this steam is huge. but I will say this: Rebecca Ferguson and the actors who play members of this cult, they are all excellent. You really despise these villains because even though you understand their motives, I mean, they're kidnapping children from across the country, basically throwing them in the back of their vans, torturing them. There's a very, very uncomfortable sequence where they kidnap none other than Jacob Tremblay.
Boy.
And they take him to this abandoned construction site where they tie him to the ground. They stick a knife into him several times because pain builds up these psychic kids' steam. And so the more pain they feel, the more steam they produce. And it was just a very cringy and uncomfortable scene to watch. And Jacob Tremblay did too good of a job.
Very uncomfortable job.
Yeah, it just made you like, I don't know.
So Abra is crazy psychic. So she actually witnesses this because in his death, she can kind of feel that this kid is being killed and he's calling out for help in any way he knows how. So Abra sees this. And because of her own power, Rebecca Ferguson's character knows that Abra exists now, and Abra is reaching out to Danny to try and get some adult to help her because she doesn't want to ask her parents because her dad is already weirded out enough by it, and her mom, I think, is kind of a little concerned about it because her mom does ask her for advice about their mom or about her mom, and she trusts the little girl's advice because you could tell. But, she's still worried for her daughter, and her daughter can sense that concern.
Mm-hmm. So there's a very visually appealing sequence where Rebecca Ferguson essentially tracks down Abra. She is literally flying through the air.
That was beautiful.
The image of her just like flying above the clouds. That was incredibly artistic and gorgeous. And I just wish Mike Flanagan had done more of that other than trying to just ape off of Kubrick, because that scene, great.
And I also like that they brought in that scene, she goes into Abra's room and you see Abra's bedroom from this side looks exactly like what you've seen in the movie. But over here are all these filing cabinets. And that is a really, really big thing that Stephen King does in a lot of his books is he looks at the mind like a library or like filing cabinets. If you guys have seen Dreamcatcher. And then she starts trying to go through things and she's looking over her shoulder to see if the little girl's in her mind's waking up. And then as she gets her hand in, all of a sudden it slams shut and Abra's right there looking really crazy.
Her eyes in the back of her head.
Ugh.
And I just love the idea that
She's like,
you know, Rebecca Ferguson is the villain and she goes to essentially hurt this little girl, but the little girl actually turns the tables and just beats the shit out of her. I really like that.
I loved it.
I love that she went in, she got into her mind, started rifling around there, and she was going fast. And then as she's doing this, Rebecca Ferguson's trying to pull her hand out of the filing cabinet, ends up skinning all of this off.
Oh,
Good
my
effect.
goodness.
It was
Okay.
awesome.
So you basically have a scene. It's right after Danny decides that he's gonna go ahead and help the little girl. So then he goes and connects with his friend and asks him for help too. So he tells him everything that's going on. You know, tells him that he needs to sit here and have an open mind about things and So the guy's in the car. He's driving, and then they're connecting with each other. The little girl through her mind and is in the car with them. So they're driving up the road, plotting out what they're gonna do. So when they get there, pretty much you see the little girl sitting on the bench, just sitting there, and then it looks like it's just it's all set up because they come up in their little RV, and they get out, and you don't see the other guy just yet.
The crow.
Right,
The crow. Yeah, I had to think of his name for a second. So then they're all coming at her, and then, well, no, actually, I'm sorry, it was the 15-year-old blonde-headed girl goes up with her with basically a needle. She's going to put her to sleep, pretty much. And it was just too easy. So pretty much she does it, and comes to find out it wasn't the little girl after all. She tricked her, and it was a teddy bear that was just on the table. So...
You want to know why Ewan McGregor was able to win in that scene? It's because he had the high ground.
Oh God.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That scene was it was brilliant, but then you had scenes where in that same scene, you kind of get mad because they shoot the 15-year-old, she's dying, and you have his friend who as she's dying, she tells him to kill himself, and that scene was like
Heart-wrenching.
That was
that had me like, oh my gosh,
because
I
we
didn't
like that
kill-
guy.
Yeah.
I did too.
And I didn't care about them killing
He was
the
the one guy that
15-year-old.
was-
She was a bitch.
Well, you kind of liked her at first because of the fact that she was
Killing or marking up.
She was
pedophiles.
killing perverted old men.
Yeah.
But the crow is able to kidnap Abra, but Danny and Abra are able to very cleverly take out the crow, leaving Rebecca Ferguson to be the last one standing. And this is where we will talk about the third act of this movie. And I will just say this. As an admirer of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, I should have adored the final act of this movie because Danny and Abra are on the road. They're talking about how they're going to lure Rebecca Ferguson to this very dangerous place, this place that is dangerous for people like them. And of course, we all know the place they're talking about.
my little fangirl self was screaming.
And, okay, I just have to say, when we first see the Overlook Hotel, you hear that musical sting.
Mm-hmm.
There's that beautiful wide shot where it's just sitting like in the distance. It's, it's pitch black out. There's, snow falling from the sky, and the
And
building
they-
itself is slightly obscured by fog.
And they are so tiny compared to the rest of the shot, so you get how this is just looming over them.
Yeah.
It gets you really excited and pumped up.
Like, oh my gosh,
Because-
we're back at this again.
It's also different from Dr. Sleep the novel because I will say this, the concept of Danny and Abra going back to the actual Overlook Hotel is much better than what King did in Dr. Sleep the book, because in the book, the hotel has actually been destroyed, and the True Knots campsite now sits on top of it. So the area of the Overlook Hotel is now their base, where the hotel used to be. However, in this movie, where they do go back to the hotel, I mean, sure, it would piss King off because King hated the Kubrick version, but this is where it started to feel like an actual sequel to The Shining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ewan McGregor, he goes inside because he needs to wake the hotel up.
That was kind of fun.
It was.
That was. You just kind of got a look of the hotel from the first one. So,
well, it was... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, because you're visiting each room and you're thinking, oh, yeah, there's...
Well, it was also the fact that, and maybe this is just me, I liked the fact that he's like, I've got to wake it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that he's like the battery for it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're bonded in that way. Neither
Mm-hmm.
is really complete without the other.
Mm-hmm.
And he walks in and it just is like, oh, hello.
He's here.
It's like a
Lights on.
Welcome back.
It's like a symbiotic relationship. Like they really need one another.
But in a terrible, terrible death kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, when they went into the hotel, the one thing I was looking forward to was the one scene that kind of disappointed me just a little bit.
Oh, the scene with the Jack Nicholson
Oh, God.
impersonator.
Henry Thomas.
Don't get me wrong. Henry Thomas is Henry Thomas, but still.
It looked like a cheap Halloween costume because, first of all, they plastered these incredibly fake-looking eyebrows on him, and
Ewan McGregor did more Nicholson with his eyebrows than that guy did.
And he has this incredibly fake-looking wig. He has the Jack Nicholson hair,
Hairdo,
it was borderline parody. I was actually chuckling during this scene.
Very disappointed with that scene.
I mean, it would have been better if they had actually got Jack Nicholson and then de-aged him.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know.
Because he would have been able to have that.
I just don't know how I felt that they were kind of reenacting like Danny sitting there kind of like how Jack Nicholson's character was sitting there when he in
At
the
the bar.
The bar scene, yeah, and you got him pouring the drink.
Well, part of it is because his dad, when the guy poured the drink for him, he took it, and Danny refused it.
Mm-hmm.
So
it was like
it was supposed to say something, but we were too busy paying attention to the terrible wig.
And no, we were paying attention to the hands, thinking, "Oh my gosh, it might be Jack Nicholson."
Oh yeah, no, that's true. As soon as that happened, I was like,
They couldn't.
No.
They couldn't get Jack back. They couldn't get Jack back.
That would have been amazing to see him and Ewan McGregor tear up that scene together.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't even have needed to change the dialogue that much. Those two could have ripped it.
I just kind of figured that it couldn't bring him back because, I mean, Jack Nicholson's a little bit older,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to have him in young form because he died young. He was going to look his younger self.
Dude, they've de-aged everybody now.
And the rest of the movie suffers because the majority of the camera setups in this final act are just one big distraction because Flanagan is he was so enticed by the idea of recreating certain shots from The Shining that he forgot to deliver on the Dr. Sleep narrative because we get we get that moment where Rebecca Ferguson is walking slowly up the stairs towards Ewan McGregor, and it's exactly like the shot in the original where Jack Nicholson is walking up the stairs, and you're not thinking about what's happening with these characters. You're just thinking about what happened in the original movie, and it just got under my skin because I should be wrapped up in what's going on. But then it honestly gets even worse because the way they take out Rebecca Ferguson's character is Danny finally unlocks the ghosts that he trapped inside his mind. He opens the boxes that they've been trapped in.
I actually thought that was kind of interesting because, like I said, Stephen King will often describe people, their mind and stuff like that as a library, as a building with different rooms and stuff like that. I liked the fact that Danny's mind is not at all a library or any place safe and inviting for him. His mind is literally the maze that his dad tried to kill him in.
Like, the concept is very
The concept
clever.
is cool.
The problem is that, well, for one, none of the original actors are in this sequence. Obviously, this takes place, or this was filmed 40 years after the first film. So, these are impersonators, and it just didn't feel right. It felt fake. I
Like when they
couldn't-
recreated that one scene up there when he goes and revisits the room.
Yeah.
And you see his head poke through, and you said Wendy, sitting there in the corner.
Yeah.
And it was like, for a second, I thought they were bringing it back from, like a clip from the Shining, but then it was that one actress playing Wendy.
But
Should
it was
we
almost nonstop fan service, and it just didn't feel right because we see certain ghost characters from the first film. There's the twin girls, there's Mr. Grady, the previous caretaker. There's the dude whose face is covered in blood, and he asks, nice night, isn't it?
Oh, the
And-
guy who was blowing the bear.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just, it's
Kubrick.
just there's just too much fan service. And I understand that, yes, this is still technically a sequel to The Shining, but it just didn't feel right.
It felt like they were trying too hard to be a sequel to The Shining instead of being their own story. And the thing is that the best sequels out there are ones that move the narrative along or that tell us something different about the narrative that we had already experienced. This didn't do any of that. It spent the last act pretty much, like you said, fan service and very little about the what they were trying to say. There were a couple of very, very clever concepts. Like I said, Danny's mind being the hedge maze and that he's frozen in that moment forever. The boxes being unleashed and the ghosts coming out and how he was basically like the containment unit at Ghostbusters HQ. But all of that was very clever. But when you're so busy doing fan service, you're not buying into your own clever ideas or the clever ideas that came in this story.
Oh my god, and I just have to say I'm sorry. Okay, so Ewan McGregor goes down to the boiling room, and of course his intent
Boiler
is
room,
to...
not boiling room.
Yes, boiler room. So Ewan McGregor goes down to the boiler room, and his intent is to obviously blow up the hotel, and there's this moment where, right before the, building explodes, they push in on his face, and I swear to God, I thought it was a setup for him to say, "Here's Johnny."
Oh, yeah, no, thank you for not doing that. That would have been totally lame and stupid.
I was waiting for it. It was going to be, that Michael Bay moment where he says, a badass line to the camera and the building explodes, but they do something more emotional.
I liked what they did.
So pretty much like the very end of the film, you have basically it zooms out on Abra basically talking to someone. You don't see this person yet, so she's sitting there talking about the story of what happened towards the end, and then you hear her say, "And that's how I knew you were okay." And then it zooms out on Ewan. I cannot remember his name. McGregor's character,
Obi-Wan.
right?
He's pulling an
Obi-Wan's
Obi-Wan.
character just standing in the corner, listening to her speak. So you're thinking, oh, okay, he's alive, maybe not. But it's kind of like, I don't know, I thought maybe he was, but that was But yeah, so then you see basically Abra's mom coming in, asking if everything's okay. And this is after he tells her that, it's okay. One thing that he wished he would have done was to be able to speak more about The Shining. So then that's when she tells her, yeah, no, it's nothing. But then as she's walking out of the room, you see her chase after Ashley, and then she tells her mom what's going on. So she actually takes his advice and is now expressing, her abilities and stuff like that. And
It's a very sweet ending.
And I like the idea that she's able to communicate with Danny as a ghost now.
kind of like Danny was with
Scatman Crothers'
Yes.
character.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't Scatman Crothers, but that guy.
Yeah.
But still, that guy was always there for Danny, trying to help him. When Danny listened, he did better.
But overall, as an adaptation of Dr. Sleep, there are some things that it did better. There are other things that it could have done better. As a sequel to The Shining, I did think it failed, if I can be completely honest.
Yeah.
But
I think it's a movie all on its own. It was pretty good.
overall, I thought it was a mixed bag. Kim?
Yeah.
I agree. Like, you know, like if it was just for the doctor, if it was just going through the Doctor Sleep, you know, storyline, it would have been really good. Take out, you know, trying to replicate The Shining, and it would have been a really good film. But like you said, mixed bag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They were trying to tell two different stories at the same time. And like you said, it confused the narrative
It
way
pulled you
too
out
much.
of the film, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that we hated this movie,
Oh, no.
because there are a good number of horror movies, you know, that just came out this year that were way, way worse. I mean, there's still
no.
a lot of craftsmanship in this movie.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we just wanted more Mike Flanagan. We wanted less, you know, Kubrick.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of weird to say, considering Kubrick is considered the you know, such an amazing genius. But yeah, I would have appreciated more of Mike Flanagan's aesthetic.
Mhm.
The time that Kubrick's aesthetic would have been more effective if all of a sudden you got that aesthetic
Mhm.
in the movie suddenly. I think it would have been better if they did it when they got to the Overlook and kind of just paid a few homage shots to it so that way it kind of, you know, brought you back to that oppressive loneliness and isolation.
Mhm.
Shout out for my favorite scene of the movie, though, when we really realized how badass Abra
Mhm.
was when she and Danny basically kill one of the bad guys by sending him through the window.
Mm-hmm.
And she just stands there and looks at him and goes, as he's twisting in agony and dying, she just looks at him and goes, I hope it hurts. And then just watches this guy die. And then when the ghost of Rebecca Ferguson's character is standing right in front of her, she gives her this little smirk and then just walks right through her.
Yeah, she was the breakout star of the movie.
Definitely.
Kylie Curran,
Oh my
you
gosh.
did an amazing job. We really enjoyed watching you in this movie. But, yes, this probably is one of the better Stephen King adaptations to be released this year. Certainly better than It Chapter 2. I would say it was probably better than the Pet Sematary remake, but that's up for discussion. But, guys, thank you so much for joining us in our discussion of Dr. Sleep. We did have a lot of fun watching the movie, and as always, we love talking to you guys and giving you our thoughts. So, for the rest of November, we don't really have anything planned, but
No.
we might just have a couple of things up our sleeves. There's something special planned, but the month of December is going to be a blast because we have a good number of Christmas horror films to get you in the mood for the holidays, including one of my favorite bad movies of all time, Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, or as I call it,
The Curse of the Eyebrows.
The Curse of the Eyebrows. But yes, would I recommend seeing Dr. Sleep? I would if you look at it as, how do I say this?
You would if you look at it as a movie on its own, not necessarily comparing it to
The Shining.
The Shining.
But again, thank you so much. And before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let me just say that we've seen some awesome trailers for 2020. We are very excited to bring you more content in the future. We got a ton of awesome new releases coming up. As far as the rest of the year, the only big new release that I can think of is a Black Christmas remake,
Yep.
Yeah.
which we'll be talking about. But other than that, look for some more of our future videos. If you like this, go and hit that subscribe button because we really love doing this.
Me
We
too.
just love it. And Boils and Ghouls, shine on.